Why this one carotenoid, astaxanthin, is getting so much attention for longevity, what would you say?
Well, it's the only natural molecule that has been proven to extend lifespan that actually has the side effect profile that you could take this every day for the rest of your life without any issues. Inflammation is a good thing in general in terms of fighting off infections and wound healing, but you don't want it to be activated chronically for no reason. And so that's what, fortunately, astaxanthin knows how to parse. It prevents the pathological activation of NF-kappa B by oxidative stress, but doesn't prevent the activation in response to infection.
Do you think it's apt to refer to astaxanthin as a longevity vitamin of sorts?
For sure, yeah. I mean, it's something that you take every day to benefit your overall health and longevity because it impacts all these issues related to heart and brain and joint and muscle and liver and immune and gut health and all these things. You are eating salmon, you're getting 5 or 8 or 10 milligrams of astaxanthin in a fillet, but you're not getting 24 milligrams or more, and you're not getting that every day necessarily. And so even if you were eating salmon a couple times a week, I mean, it's great, you'll be getting some astaxanthin, but you're not going to be getting the levels that are probably going to give you the most health and longevity. One myth about the farm-raised salmon is...
Dave Watumull, welcome back to the show. How you doing?
Thanks, I'm great. It's great to be here.
Fresh off the plane from Hawaii to school us all on the mystical, seemingly mystical powers of this powerful carotenoid, astaxanthin, which my audience knows I'm a huge fan of. And you are the GOAT when it comes to all things astaxanthin and more broadly carotenoid science. So I'm excited to get into it, but I love to just dive right in. If you had to explain to a 12-year-old why this one carotenoid, astaxanthin, is getting so much attention for longevity, what would you say?
Well, it's the only natural molecule that has been proven to extend lifespan in the rigorous NIH-funded interventions testing program that actually has the side effect profile that you could take this every day for the rest of your life without any issues. And so there are other agents that extend lifespan, but they have issues that you wouldn't want to take them on a daily basis, whether it's tolerability issues or safety issues. And so this being something that's naturally occurring, potent antioxidant, potent anti-inflammatory, but with exceptional safety to extend your lifespan and your health span because it benefits your joints and your heart and your brain, is something that is very unique. There's nothing else like it.
So that's incredible. Our own NIH basically took the time to study astaxanthin, and they determined that not only was it effective in mammalian models at extending lifespan, but that it was notably very safe in doing so.
Yeah. So the program that they've conducted is something that takes several years in mice. And so the mice, if they live longer, it is somewhat of an indication of safety in the sense that they lived longer. They didn't die earlier from some toxic effect. But if you look at the rest of the safety studies with astaxanthin and the tolerability studies and the exposure in humans, it's something that distinguishes itself compared to other agents in a big way.
And astaxanthin is not synthetic, correct? It's naturally, I mean, there are synthetic forms of it. It can be synthesized, but it's a compound that is found in nature.
Yes, it is a compound that's found in nature, and it's ubiquitous in the marine environment. And so it's actually what is responsible for the beautiful red, orange, pink coloration that you find in salmon, and crab, and lobster, and shrimp. But it's so much more than just a color. But that color comes from its really unique molecular or chemical structure. And so it's kind of like it has this long backbone that has these conjugated double bonds. And so it's these alternating single and double bonds that create a chromophore, which absorbs light. And so it absorbs the blue and green light and then reflects the red and the orange light. And so that's why it imparts this red color. It also has these ring groups on the end of the molecule with hydroxyl and ketone groups that are oxygenated. And these oxygen groups give astaxanthin polarity that allows it to span membranes. And those ring groups also help to impart the color that it's really known for. But beyond just color, this chemical structure of astaxanthin, like I said, allows it to anchor across the cellular membrane with the perfect length to do so, with the polarity on the ends that allow it to anchor into the phospholipid heads of the cell membranes and span across the fatty acid tails that are within the membrane. And in doing so, it's perfectly situated to stabilize the membrane, but also fight off free radicals, reactive oxygen species, both within and outside the membrane. And that's very unique compared to other antioxidants, which may get in the membrane but can disrupt the membrane or only fight off free radicals inside or outside the membrane, but not in both locations.
So cool. Now, I think one of the things that separates astaxanthin from the rest of the pack in terms of, longevity nutrients is that there are also decades worth of human trials, like clinical trials in humans, which was really compelling to me when I first started to dig into this literature years ago, well beyond, well before we developed a partnership. Astaxanthin, unlike many of the longevity molecules that are now being talked about and marketed to consumers, I mean, they're literally, you have like going back decades worth of human clinical data on everything from, skin health to eye health. I mean, you can speak to this, but would love to get into some of that, like the human clinical data.
Yeah, and so when I first learned about astaxanthin, it was in the late 90s, and there were no human studies at the time. There was just limited research, only a few hundred peer-reviewed papers. And over the last 25 plus years, there's been an explosion of research with now more than 4,000 peer-reviewed papers and around 100 human clinical studies that, like you said, have explored, its effects in a variety of areas, from cognitive function to cardiovascular health, muscle function, endurance, et cetera. And so it's something that has really found benefit in a variety of different areas, given that it's distributed throughout the body. So it's absorbed, it gets to your heart, gets to your brain, gets distributed throughout your whole body. And in all of those tissues, it gets into the cells and fights off the oxidative stress and inflammation that can wreak havoc in a variety of different ways and may manifest itself as different issues that people think of as separate conditions or health issues, but really they're related at the molecular level, and astaxanthin gets there and is that kind of protector of the cells in all these critical locations.
Maybe you could talk about what oxidative stress and inflammation is, because I think that's like, I would consider oxidative stress to be a sort of Rosetta Stone when it comes to understanding these myriad seemingly disconnected chronic conditions. They all seem to have, or at least many of them have, out of control oxidative stress and inflammation as sort of a cornerstone.
Yeah, so the body produces energy in the mitochondria, and it brings in oxygen and nutrients, and as a byproduct of that energy production, you will have oxygen waste products, reactive oxygen species that typically are handled by endogenous antioxidant systems or dietary antioxidants that we intake. But whether we are aging or we're injured or we're overexerting ourselves or in response to infections and other things, the free radicals, the reactive oxygen species can ramp up, and there can be an overwhelming effect on your built-in systems to fight them off. And when that happens, there can be a series of events that are not good. So if you look at your cellular membranes, which are comprised of lipids, those lipids can be oxidated, and that can affect the integrity of your cellular membranes, which is something that is really, your membranes are really critical for the functioning of your cells. You have your receptors, and you have activities, cascades of events that stem from the membranes and things that need to pass through the membranes. And so it can affect the permeability of the membranes. They can leak out things, like in the case of exercise, you can damage your muscle cells, and some of the critical components can leak out, into the bloodstream, and that's, not good. You can also have oxidative, lipid byproducts that then trigger a series of events that start, inflammation or other kind of negative effects within the cell. And if you look at the case of inflammation, you can look at NF-κB, which is one of the well-known inflammatory pathways, and it can be activated in response to an infection, which is a good thing. You want to fight that off. It's how we naturally survive. But it also can be activated by oxidative stress. And so that would be a typical case where you wouldn't want it to be activated. And then it can set off a chain of events with inflammatory cytokines that are released that end up potentially damaging tissues and on a chronic basis, which over time, can cause damage to your tissues, whether it's in your heart or your brain or your liver, wherever it may be, which is really bad. And so inflammation is a good thing in general in terms of fighting off infections and wound healing, but you don't want it to be activated chronically for no reason and where it just basically eats away at your body. And so that's what, fortunately, astaxanthin knows how to parse. It basically prevents the pathological activation of, say, NF-kappa B by oxidative stress, but doesn't prevent the activation in response to infection. And so that allows it to be safe but effective at the same time, whereas other anti-inflammatories may work downstream on cytokines produced by NF-kappa B, like TNF-alpha, which is a major target of drugs that are used for, say, like rheumatoid arthritis, for example, but they just chronically inhibit, say, TNF-alpha all the time. So whether that's being produced, for an infection purpose, or it's happening, chronically, in a situation that you don't want, it's doing it all the time. So it may prevent, the pain in your joints, but it also is going to mean that you can't fight off that infection, and that can kill you as well. So that's why a lot of anti-inflammatories are typically not safe, whereas astaxanthin has the unique benefit of actually being a safe anti-inflammatory.
That's amazing. There was, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't there a recent clinical trial looking at astaxanthin in the setting of rheumatoid arthritis?
There was, yeah. And that's actually one of the studies that I thought would be fun to talk about today. So they looked at, let me just pull up some of the details here, but it was a group, it was published just in July of this year. And rheumatoid arthritis obviously is something that is really debilitating for so many people, where the immune system just attacks itself and your joints are really, really damaged, and unfortunately. And so this was a randomized triple-blind study where they actually have the participants and the doctors and the data analysts all blinded, so it's a very rigorous type of study. And it was with 60 subjects, which is a decent size. It's not the phase 3 pharmaceutical type of trial that you'd use for a drug approval, but it's a pilot study that gives you an indication if it works. And typically, if you can get statistical significance in the small sample size, that's a good thing. And so they had an astaxanthin group, and they also had a placebo group, and they gave a dose of about 20 milligrams a day, which is equivalent to, say, 2 capsules of most products on the market. Ours are 12 milligram astaxanthin capsules, for example. And they took blood samples to look at inflammatory biomarkers as a measure for impacting the disease. And interestingly, they looked at the disease activity score, which they look at 28 joints, and they say out of all of these, they go through, like, is this tender? Is this swollen? And then they also look at things like your erythrocyte sedimentation rate, which is basically you take the red blood cells, the erythrocytes, and normally they repel each other because of a negative charge on their surface. But when in the case of inflammation, the liver produces these inflammatory proteins that coat the red blood cells and cause them to lose that negative charge, and then they clump together. And
so
it gets heavier.
Stickier.
They get stickier, and they clump together, and then they sink in the test tube in the case of the erythrocyte sedimentation rate test. And so that's one of the tests for inflammation that's used. And so they measured that. And then they also did like a health assessment where they ask them, like, do you have issues with dressing and grooming and eating and walking, kind of day-to-day activities? And which, for most people, you don't even think about it. But if you have rheumatoid arthritis, for example, then that becomes an issue. And I know, say, like with your back issue, which wasn't rheumatoid arthritis, but it's something where you don't realize that how much your back impacts everything, every movement. So getting dressed, it becomes a really big issue. So they ask all of these things, and they found that they had improvements in the disease activity score, in the related health assessment questionnaire, in the erythrocyte sedimentation rate, in the CRP levels, and it was all statistically significant with a p-value less than 0.05, which is kind of the standard for statistical significance. And so that's something that, while it doesn't prove that this is like a treatment for rheumatoid arthritis, and as a supplement, you can't make those types of claims, but it's really interesting from a research standpoint to see that it's impacting the mechanisms related to rheumatoid arthritis and other inflammatory conditions, and also having real-world benefits in terms of those assessments of how your joints are feeling and your inflammatory, biomarkers. So I think it points to, something that helps to validate its role as an effective and safe anti-inflammatory, and also supports future research in this space to expand and further validate its role in these types of conditions.
It's so exciting, the fact that it's, a naturally derived compound that's found in nature. Again, wild salmon are rich in it. The fact that you saw such a marked improvement that was statistically significant, and even despite such a small, such a small population size, that's amazing.
Yeah. No, it's really cool, and there's all types of studies like this when you look into the research and in a variety of different spaces, and it's really rewarding to just kind of look and see if it's impacted this area or that area. But it makes sense because mechanistically it all ties together in terms of the oxidative stress and the inflammation that's happening at the cellular level. And just to touch on that a bit further, with astaxanthin in the membranes, that's the membrane of the outer layer of the cell, so it protects the cell in general, and it impacts the activity of receptors and other things in the cell membrane, and can influence pathways that are activated in that way. If, like I said, fights off free radicals that can cause lipid peroxidation or oxidation of the lipids in the membrane, and so therefore protecting the integrity of the membranes. And also, like I said, fighting off the inflammation, the inflammatory pathways, but it also gets into the membranes of the nucleus, so it protects the DNA from oxidation. It gets into the membranes of the mitochondria, which is a really privileged site and the source of energy production. And so it's right there in the perfect situation, in the perfect location to fight off the reactive oxygen species that are produced as a byproduct of energy production. So it's in all of these locations. Not only is it throughout, distributed throughout your body, it's in all the locations within the cell that really matter. And so it can have an impact on things in all of those membranes and all of those locations, and even activity in the cytoplasm, or kind of the main general space within the cell. And so that really distinguishes it from other antioxidants. And in addition to directly donating electrons or potentially accepting electrons to neutralize free radicals, which is how antioxidants work, to take a reactive oxygen species or a free radical that has an unpaired electron. It can, say, donate an electron and neutralize it, so it's no longer reactive and damaging proteins and lipids, et cetera. But it can also influence your pathways that are your endogenous antioxidant systems. And so it can impact like NERV2 and like glutathione and other things that allow your body to use its own built-in antioxidant defense systems. And going back to your original question about how does this impact longevity, it also impacts longevity pathways like AMPK, which if you look into longevity, you'll see that as a pathway that's often referred to. And so AMPK is an energy sensing pathway, and so AMPK stands for AMP activated protein kinase, and so AMP in this case is, if we think about ATP as the energy source in the cells, is what the energy the mitochondria use to produce your energy. And ATP is adenosine triphosphate. It has these 3 phosphate groups, and the energy is stored within those phosphate bonds. And so when it essentially burns that to create energy, you'll lose a phosphate group, and it'll go from ATP, the triphosphate, to ADP, the diphosphate. And as a little tangent, this is where creatine helps to come in and play a role, where creatine can become phosphocreatine with the help of creatine kinase, which is an enzyme that helps to put a phosphate onto creatine. And then creatine becomes this buffer of energy that's storing that phosphate group, and then it can react with ADP to create more ATP. So it puts that phosphate group back from ADP, back onto ADP to create ATP, and then now your body can create more energy. Likewise, if you have an energy surplus and you don't need to burn all that energy right now, the ATP can give the phosphate back to creatine, again with the help of creatine kinase, and then you get back to ADP, and now you have your creatine, your phosphocreatine there sitting, waiting as that kind of battery, ready to give off some energy. But in the case of ADP, if that further, is utilized and goes to AMP, so adenosine monophosphate, then that's a low energy state in the cell. And in that low energy condition, that's what triggers AMPK. It gets activated because it looks at that ratio of AMP to ATP, and then it starts doing things to say, okay, let's conserve energy, let's turn off lipid synthesis and protein synthesis, and let's do things that help us with energy, like glucose uptake into the cells, and like fat oxidation to help burn to create energy. And so it does these things, and it also directly and indirectly does things that activate autophagy, the cellular cleanup mechanism. So I guess it's low on energy and like let's clean up house and clean up the cell. And so it directly activates ULK1, which is involved in creating the autophagy process, but also it inhibits mTOR, which is the target of rapamycin, which is a well-known longevity agent, which is responsible for autophagy as well. It also activates FOXO3, which is another anti-aging gene, and actually something that out of our research with the University of Hawaii, we showed that astaxanthin upregulated FOXO3 in the heart tissue of mice. And that was what led to our inclusion in the NIH ITP program to explore longevity.
It activated it by almost double, right?
Yeah, it was like 90%. Increase, which is like a double. And so FOXO3 also influences autophagy, and so that's something that again is activated by by AMPK. And then in addition, AMPK helps to activate PGC1 alpha, which is a master regulator of mitogenesis, which is the creation of more mitochondria. And so the more mitochondria you have, the more energy that can be produced, and also influences the function of your mitochondria. And so with astaxanthin working to activate AMPK, you have these impacts on autophagy, you have impacts on mitogenesis and other factors that are critical for overall health and for longevity.
It's amazing. Now that might have been a lot for people who are naive to biochemistry, but AMPK is what is stimulated by, among other things, metformin. Mm-hmm. Which for a long time was being looked at as a potentially pro-longevity agent. But then it came to light that it also had these unintended consequences of blunting some of the adaptive, the positive aspects of exercise that we do want to stimulate. So the notion that astaxanthin can stimulate AMPK, which is also stimulated by other compounds that we know are really good for us. I believe vinegar, there's like berberine stimulates AMPK.
I mean, exercise, fasting.
Yeah, fasting stimulates AMPK. So that a nutrient can stimulate the same pathway without seemingly any negative effects. That's super exciting stuff.
Yeah, it's super cool. And it helps to explain, how it can do all these things. And everyone is really excited about rapamycin, and it inhibits mTOR, but so does astaxanthin, not directly, but through the AMPK pathway. So it really helps to back up the evidence that we've seen in terms of actual lifespan extension. So we talked about the NIH Interventions Testing Program, which is a really rigorous program in mammals, in mice, where they take mice and they follow them for their entire lifespan, which is multiple years, which ideally you do it in humans, but it would take decades, to do that study. And so this is kind of the best, the closest you can get to, using a mammal and looking at lifespan. And they follow these mice for years, and they see what agents work. And rapamycin worked, but metformin didn't work in that program. And other things like, and not to say they don't have health benefits like omega-3s or green tea or NAD-related products like NR, the precursor to NAD, did not work, in this program. But astaxanthin, like I said, did, and was the only, natural supplement type of molecule that extended lifespan more than 10%, but also, has the safety and the kind of general availability as a supplement rather than an obscure drug that's hard to get that has side effects and things like that might be much more for a niche community like rapamycin, for example. But the NIH study was also backed up by other longevity models where astaxanthin was shown to extend lifespan in worms and in fruit flies and yeast, which are common, laboratory types of testing systems to look at various aspects of disease and aging. And so astaxanthin, it makes sense when you look at its extended lifespan in all these different species or models, but also impacts these longevity pathways or these hallmarks of aging. And so, like we talked about, autophagy, mitochondrial function or dysfunction, preventing dysfunction or mitigating that, reducing oxidative stress and inflammation, all these critical aspects, the oxidation of proteins and lipids, impacts or helps to prevent those things which otherwise can cause aging or other health issues.
I was so pleasantly surprised when I was reading a couple years ago a paper by the late great Bruce Ames, who's done a lot of work in the micronutrient space, longevity space. The paper was, I forget the exact title of the paper, but it was something. People can Google this. It was like Bruce Ames, putative longevity vitamins. And I was just reading it in hopes of trying to discover something new. And as I was getting further and further into the paper, it was like listing off all of these different compounds. I believe lutein and zeaxanthin were among them. Magnesium was he dubbed a putative longevity vitamin. And then I come to astaxanthin, and I was so pleasantly surprised to see it there because I had been already taking astaxanthin for 5-6 years at that point. Do you think it's apt to refer to astaxanthin as a longevity vitamin of sorts?
For sure, yeah. I mean, it's safe like a vitamin in that sense, and something you should take every day. And it's similar in the sense that you don't always feel it, like when you first take it. Some people actually feel benefits with their joints, for example, like day one or week one or month one. Others do not, or maybe they don't have joint issues. But it's like a vitamin. It's something that you take every day to benefit your overall health and longevity. And it has amazing science behind it. And from a longevity standpoint, it's not just lifespan, but it's also health span, where you can have the quality of life improved because it impacts all these issues related to heart and brain and joint and muscle and liver and immune and gut health and all these things. And so you're extending lifespan and increasing the health during those years. And in that study with the NIH, we had a 12% increase in lifespan, which if you were to extrapolate that to humans, would be potentially like around a decade. And so if you could have an extra decade of lifespan, and that lifespan could be healthy, that would be huge. I mean, it's not living to 200, but who wouldn't want an extra decade healthy? I mean, that would be great, right?
Of course, and especially for men, right? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but in this study, it was male mice in particular that saw this 10% boost, which isn't to say that it's not also very valuable for women in terms of warding off age-related chronic disease. But maybe you can speak to that. What do you think it was about the fact that the mice that saw this 10% benefit were male?
Well, the female mice already lived longer than the males if you look at the controls. And so they're already living longer. And this study allowed the males to catch up to the females, if you will. At the end of the day, the females still lived slightly longer than the males, but rather than the males being like 10% less, they're now like 1% less or something. So they caught up much closer. And
helps level the playing field.
Yeah.
For the fellas.
So hopefully, people like older in age, they can live the same duration. That'd be great, right? Rather than one dying off sooner. But yeah, so I think, there are obviously differences biologically between male and females and hormones and things that do influence aging. And so it appears that what astaxanthin is doing has more of an impact in the male species related to longevity, at least in that study. We'd have to see, in humans or other animal models if that is a male versus female specific finding for lifespan. But we do know from looking at all of these studies in humans, clinical and then also non-clinical studies in animals, for example, that astaxanthin does benefit males and females.
And it also benefits male and female health span.
Yeah. And so the studies, to clarify, don't specifically measure health span per se in terms of like, let's follow your heart health for the next 30 years, but they're more, specific studies that look at, cardiovascular biomarkers over 12 weeks, or like in the rheumatoid arthritis study, they look at it over a fixed period of time. And so, but you can infer that, okay, if I have all these benefits on critical areas of health and I'm also increasing lifespan, then that should give a health span benefit. But there are ways to potentially, say in the NIH program, they have a variation of their study where rather than just looking at lifespan, they follow the health span of the animals, and they will look at different time points along the way before they pass away, and then look at their organs and see like, okay, are there any issues that would indicate, liver issues, heart issues, which maybe you wouldn't be able to see on the surface level just looking at the animal, but if you kind of take a closer look, you can see, are you influencing aspects of health at the kind of tissue, cellular type of level.
So what do people need to know if they choose to supplement with astaxanthin?
I think they need to know that they're taking a really potent antioxidant, anti-inflammatory. It's exceptionally safe. They may or may not feel a benefit day one, or potentially ever, in terms of, because you don't necessarily need to feel it working. You can measure biomarkers. And so that's one thing where if you can feel a difference in your joints or your muscles, or in your energy levels, or your cognitive processing, your memory, your attention, your information processing, or your endurance or your recovery, if you feel those things, that's fantastic. And if you're, say, a power user in the sense where you're an athlete and you want to really look at, and you're measuring all types of things and really have a close kind of look at all of your health aspects, you can see that, okay, this is influencing my endurance, this is influencing my recovery. But on the other hand, you also don't necessarily feel a difference in your cholesterol levels, but you can measure those. And so you should measure your biomarkers. And whether that's 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, you should get them done on a regular basis just in general. But you also need to give astaxanthin a period of time to work and to influence your biomarkers. And so you can look at your cholesterol levels like LDL or HDL. And ideally, if you have some more specialized testing, you can even look at like oxidized LDL, which is the oxidation of your LDL, and it is much worse than just the LDL number itself. You can also look at your inflammation. So you can look at HS-CRP, which is a common widespread measure of inflammation. And it's actually been proven in really rigorous studies that are conducted in thousands of people that show that if you reduce your CRP below 2 or even below 1, it really reduces your chance of major adverse cardiovascular events, so heart attacks and strokes, et cetera. So that's a really important measure to keep an eye on and to reduce. There's other inflammatory biomarkers that can be measured, like TNF-alpha, for example. And so those are all things that should be monitored. And so that's one thing that you don't want to just take it for a few weeks and be like, oh, works or doesn't work. Hopefully you feel something if there is something that you're looking to feel, but otherwise, take a chance to measure after 3 months and after 6 months, and then you can actually adjust your dose. You can start with, say you were taking 12 or 24 milligrams, which are common doses of astaxanthin. Maybe you increase or maybe you decrease your dose, because given the safety window, which is something that some people take much, much more than 12 or 24 milligrams and have found benefits, which is supported by human studies and animal studies as well. And so you can have the benefit of titrating your dose to effect, whether it's to effect of how you feel or to effect of a certain biomarker that you want to see an impact on. Which, for example, we conducted a cardiovascular health study in real-world people that had cardiovascular disease or risk factors for heart disease, and they were taking all the standard of care medications for like statins, et cetera. And over a 12-week period, we showed that with a high dose of 96 milligrams, which is like 8 capsules a day, so not the most practical or convenient, but still doable, that we saw an increase in the reduction of cholesterol and blood pressure, like oxidized LDL, as compared to a lower dose of 24 milligrams, or certainly compared to placebo with no astaxanthin. So that's something that people should know, is like there is a range of dosing that is feasible scientifically in terms of what can benefit your health. But if you want to just take it for overall longevity, like a longevity vitamin, then something in that 12 to 24 milligrams is probably enough, because there isn't a perfect way to extrapolate the data from that NIH study, which is the best longevity study we have at this point. But some people try to calculate like the body surface area of the mice, and there's a conversion factor to humans, and you come up with what the dose is. But there's also an absorption factor where rodents don't absorb carotenoids, and in particular astaxanthin, very well. And so you have to give them a much higher dose to get an equivalent amount into the body. And so what you can look at, though, are blood levels of how much you actually got in there. And when the investigators at the NIH program measured the blood before starting the full study with the ITP, the blood levels that they got were equivalent to, in that cardiovascular human study that we conducted, to what we got in that 24 milligram group. And also when we did a separate study looking at the absorption of astaxanthin from our supplement versus other supplements on the market, we also did the 24 milligram dose, but it was just a single dose rather than 12 weeks of dosing, and got a similar range of blood levels of astaxanthin. So that gives us an idea that that's probably close to what the mice were getting in that ITP longevity study.
24 milligrams?
Yeah, in that 12 to 24 range. Yeah, so that's perfect. So it's supporting your longevity, and kind of think of it as that longevity vitamin. But if you want to be that power user that uses it more for endurance or recovery, or maybe has specific health issues that they're trying to target, like I want to reduce my hsCRP, it's still up at this level, let me see if I can bring it down more, then you might try to bump it up and see what works.
It's the only like longevity supplement that I would say that I take religiously, and that I have taken for a really long time. I mean, well before our relationship. Like, I just was like, for whatever reason, I don't know how I initially discovered it, but once I discovered it and I dug into the literature, it was just very compelling to me. And I take creatine religiously, I would say, and I very cognizant of my obviously my nutrition and all of the other levers that I think are important to to control with regards to health today. But yeah, I mean, I definitely I see the value in it for sure.
Well, I think you're just really curious, obviously, in terms of looking into the research and for everything related to overall health and brain health. And so astaxanthin is something that shines in the research. When you search around, it comes up. And it's part of that carotenoid family. So you have things like lutein and zeaxanthin that are great for brain and eye health as well. But astaxanthin is kind of that superior carotenoid, we believe, and just based on, if you look at the evolution of carotenoids over time, which co-evolved with photosynthesis to protect plants against UV light from the sun. And it's the reason why microalgae produce astaxanthin in the wild and how it works its way up the food chain. But it's this defense mechanism against UV light from the sun. But if you look at the carotenoids as they evolved over time, they started with simpler structures like that conjugated backbone with the alternating double and single bonds, and carotenoids like lycopene, which is found in tomatoes. And then it started to get these ring groups on the end, and then those evolved over time. And you had things like beta carotene, which is related to astaxanthin and looks very similar structurally to the untrained eye, but it doesn't have those hydroxyl and ketone groups on the rings that give astaxanthin its polarity, which when you have the oxygen and the hydrogen hydroxyl group, or the oxygen double bonded with the carbon for the ketone group, the oxygen kind of loves the electrons and kind of hogs and pulls on the electrons in those bonds and kind of creates this separation of the charges. It creates a dipole, which is that polarity that then allows it to anchor across that membrane, whereas say like beta carotene doesn't have those oxygenated groups in the head terminal rings of the molecule. That means it's not polar, and so it gets into the membrane, but it just kind of disrupts the membrane and the phospholipids in the membrane. It doesn't actually anchor across the membrane. And even say like lutein and zeaxanthin, they are xanthophils, they are oxygenated like astaxanthin, but they don't have the same number of those functional groups, the hydroxyl and ketone groups, that astaxanthin does. So astaxanthin is more polar, and it probably has therefore a better kind of anchoring, spanning ability in the membranes, but also those groups help to neutralize free radicals as well. So it kind of gives it its orientation benefits, but also its antioxidant benefits, and is part of the reason why it's so potent and was shown to be, so much more potent as a singlet oxygen, scavenger compared to other antioxidants. It's either hundreds or thousands of times, more potent in some tests, than like vitamin C and vitamin E and beta carotene, for example. So it's something that, again, if you're looking in the research, you'll start to find it popping up and having the impacts on all these areas, in areas that you're interested in, like longevity and brain health and athletic or exercise related health.
It's amazing, yeah. And my friend Teo Soleimani, who's one of the foremost. He's a dermatologist based in LA, but he's got a huge footprint on social media because he's just a brilliant surgeon and thought leader in the space, in the field of dermatology. He's also a huge fan of astaxanthin for what it does for skin health.
Yeah, if you go on TikTok, you'll find all types of content about astaxanthin for skin coloration and how kind of like a tanning type of, giving some color to your skin. But beyond that, it's something that protects the integrity of your skin. So just like the microalgae that produce astaxanthin to fight off the damage that can be caused by the sun, that can do the same in our skin. So it helps to prevent the damage to the DNA in our skin cells from UV light. And therefore has had impacts on reductions of wrinkles and fine lines and increased elasticity and moisture content. And this is both looking at oral and topical applications of astaxanthin. So it's something that is much more predominant now in the cosmetic space because of those benefits that are now being further characterized and elucidated. So I think you'll see it in more and more products in the future in the cosmetic space. But when you take the supplement, you're getting those skin health benefits as well.
It's amazing. I know that you wanted to talk to us a little bit about the color, its unique hue, and you brought in like a demo of sorts for us.
Yeah. So first off, astaxanthin, given that structure that I talked about, it has that conjugated backbone, which is a series of double and single bonds, and that allows astaxanthin to absorb blue-green light and reflect the red-orange light, and give it this amazing color. But also that same structure allows it to function by spanning the membrane and fighting off the free radicals. And so the structure has this kind of dual purpose of imparting color, but also these health benefits that are really amazing. And so I thought it'd be fun to show the color of astaxanthin here.
Yeah, let's see it.
So we got, normally with most products on the market, you wouldn't be able to do this because you have a capsule with oil with astaxanthin suspended with an extract of the algae, for example. In our case, we just have a white capsule that contains a powder with astaxanthin. And the astaxanthin that we use is laboratory produced so that it can be much more pure. And it's like a pharmaceutical-like manufacturing process, so super pure, super consistent batch to batch. And it allows us to formulate it in a way that can be really bioavailable. And in one of those studies that I mentioned, we compared it versus the extract from the algae that was suspended in oil. And we gave the participants the same dose of 2 12-milligram capsules. And we gave the group that dose, took their blood at multiple time points over 24 hours, measured their blood for astaxanthin, and then we sent the group home for a week so that the astaxanthin would wash out of their system, and then brought them back and gave the same people, our version of the supplement, our formulation, and again measured their blood and got 3 times the amount of astaxanthin into the bloodstream. And so it's the same amount of astaxanthin in the pill or in the capsule, but 3 times more getting into the body. Wow. So it's much more.
You're getting 3 times more for your money.
Exactly. So
that's awesome.
But what also is interesting is with this formulation, it is water dispersible because astaxanthin is a fat soluble molecule, and normally, and unless you specially formulate it. So this allows you to put it into. Well, first of all, you can just take the capsule like you would any supplement. But if you prefer, you can put it into water or shakes or food products. And so it gives you that flexibility. Or for a pet health application, you could put it into wet food for a dog or a cat or make a little treat or chew out of it. So I'll just show, I'm going to open up the capsule here.
Yeah, this would be a good time, guys, if you're not already watching on YouTube, to check it out. Check out what Dave's doing on YouTube, or to turn on your video if you're listening to this on Spotify, just to check this out. It's super cool.
Yeah. And so first off, you'll see that we have the formulation, which is the powder is not red. So sometimes we get questions like, how come the powder isn't red? Astaxanthin is red. Well, it's because the powder is actually just very, very, it's so red, it's like a deep violet. And so you don't actually know that it's red until you start putting in water. And first of all, I'll show that you can see the red already starting to emerge, from the formulation, just drifting down. And
that's so cool.
Yeah, and so if we just sat here, it would just kind of dispense into the water.
It's beautiful.
But then if we shake it up, it just becomes like a perfectly red almost like a Kool-Aid or something.
And that is the color of wild salmon.
Yeah, and so that's why salmon are pink or red or orange. And what's also
pink flamingos, right? They're
flamingos. Yeah,
flamingos are born. They're white until they begin eating their biologically appropriate diet of, what is it, krill or algae, or
like the crustaceans that feed on the algae. And exactly. And so that's part of their diet. And so that's how it transfers the astaxanthin to their feathers. In the case of salmon, it transfers the astaxanthin to their flesh. And even when they're swimming upstream, the astaxanthin is transferred from their flesh to their skin.
Wow, this is so cool.
And just gets more and more red as it gets released, right?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Now, this is a fat-soluble compound, so even though your astaxanthin, AX3 astaxanthin, is not suspended in oil, which I think is, for the reasons that you mentioned and others, I think that is a benefit, because first of all, a lot of the oils that are used to suspend astaxanthin, they're not the best quality oils.
Yeah, you have like safflower oils.
Yeah, and some of the other products on the market. But then also you can break it open, and like what I was doing for a long time is I found a way to give my cat Delilah, who I love very much, and I want to see her around forever. I broke the capsules open, and I found a way to dose her with I think it was like 1 milligram or maybe even less per day, just mixed into her food.
Yeah. And so, but the problem is, if you happen to have one of those capsules fall on the ground, which I think you said has happened, you step on it, it can squirt everywhere and be a big red mess. And so, like, our old laboratories had red stains everywhere because it's a red pigment. It's a red dye, if you will. I mean, it's a natural pigment. It's a natural color, but it's really cool that, like in the case of salmon, not only is it in their flesh and transferred to their skin as they're swimming upstream and you see them turning bright red. I mean, it's actually helping the salmon power their way upstream, because that journey, they're essentially wasting away as they're going back upstream to mate and reproduce. And the astaxanthin is helping their muscular endurance and recovery, which they're already wasting away and not eating as they're swimming upstream, which is pretty miraculous. But this helps to kind of probably attenuate or mitigate that muscle deterioration effect. And by the way, there's other studies showing that astaxanthin reduces muscle damage or muscle deterioration or sarcopenia in humans, which is the wasting away of muscle as we age, which is a really bad thing, for longevity. So it helps to counteract that. In the case of salmon, allows them to swim upstream. And then when they ultimately make their way upstream and then reproduce, the astaxanthin is transferred to their eggs. And that's why the salmon eggs are red as well. And it helps to prevent the eggs from UV light in the shallow waters where the eggs are laid. And then also helps with the development of the eggs, as they're growing. And so it's something that you see visually with the color, and then it's having all these health benefits, and endurance benefits along the way.
Does it have a flavor? Can we taste it?
Yeah, we can try it. So actually, that's the thing. Some of the other products, if you take the algal form, if you open up the bottle and you kind of smell it, it may smell a little fishy or kind of like, it's algae, and so it can have that fishy smell or taste. Ours does not have any smell or taste, and so it's very strange, because you're thinking, okay, I have something that is red, it should be sweet or it have some flavor, but no, well, I'll let you be the judge.
You got to make some kind of like ready to drink punch, right? It just it begs to be.
I know, right? Yeah.
Mixed into some like punch, like concoction. Yeah, no flavor.
Yeah, just red water, right?
Yeah, it's great. Now you want to take this with fat, right?
Yeah.
For it to be maximally absorbed.
Yeah, and so even though it is water dispersible, it helps the astaxanthin be dispersed in the aqueous fluid of your gut, which is water-based. And so it helps to probably take it from just a little clump of material to just be nicely dispersed throughout the fluid in your gut. But then the reason why you want to have some fat in your meal is that when your body is processing the fats through absorption, astaxanthin hitches a ride with those fats, and it kind of gets a process along the way with how the body processes fats. And so being a fat-soluble molecule itself, that's why you want to have the fat content in the meal. And so you kind of have this dual benefit of it's water dispersible, so it gives different administration advantages, and we believe that's probably the reason why it has the increased bioavailability in the studies that we've demonstrated. But then ultimately, you still need to have the fat content on board to help with the proper absorption.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And people don't need to like add fat to their diets in order to take this. Like they can just take it with breakfast.
Yeah. So
Right.
as long as it's not just like an orange or something, but if it's, toast with peanut butter, or if it's eggs, and bacon or whatever it may be, something just with some fat content, which is found in most normal meals, then yeah, that's fine. That's perfect. And with or shortly after the meal would be the optimal time.
So cool. What do you think about giving it to pets? Because it's not marketed as such, right? It's not like a. But I have noted, I have seen that there are some veterinary approved supplements on the market, concoctions of various nutrients marketed to pets.
Yeah.
Which leads me to believe that can potentially play a beneficial role in the health of your pet as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there have been a bunch of studies, in animals, first off, because not all research is done in humans. And so there's a lot of animal research that shows benefits and can be extrapolated to pets. But there's also some research actually in dogs and cats. In cats, it's pretty limited. There's some work looking at immune health benefits. And in dogs, there's a bit more. They've shown, say, production of energy. So they looked at ATP production in both young and old dogs and found benefits in both of those. And then there's other studies as well that show benefits. Most research is done, rodents or other kind of laboratory, species that are used for testing. But again, there are some studies in dogs and cats that do directly support its benefit.
And also in cats, I mean, astaxanthin would not be out of the ordinary of a biologically appropriate diet for felines because, cats eat salmon.
Yeah, exactly. And even some dog chow has salmon in it as well. And so, so they are getting it in some of their dietary sources. I think it's been shown to be beneficial in those cases. And if you look at, say, like our special formulation, the ingredients we use for the formulation are all commonly used in dietary products or supplements for dogs and for cats. And so there's no concern with that as well. And from a safety standpoint, there's been really extensive toxicity testing done with astaxanthin. And this spans multiple different animal species. So, mice and rats and rabbits, but also dogs have been, tested with astaxanthin and shown, to be very safe. Or it was proven that astaxanthin was very safe in the dogs. So I think it's something that you should help support, the joint health of your dogs, the immune health of your dogs or cats, and the longevity, ultimately, hopefully, to allow all of our dogs and cats and other pets to live longer lives. And we know of, veterinarians that use astaxanthin in their practice and use it with not only cats and dogs, but also even like pigs and other animals that people have as pets, and they've seen benefits in those cases as well.
Now, where would you place astaxanthin in a longevity or just a broadly general health supplementation stack? Does it share redundancy? Are there redundancies with other nutrients that people might already be taking? Does it maybe possibly have a synergistic effect with a compound like creatine, which now many people take, myself included?
Yeah. I think that it should be a foundational component of any stack. And so whether you're taking from an athletic standpoint or just from an overall health and longevity standpoint, creatine and protein, for example, it would make sense in that case because it supports the activities of day-to-day life with endurance and recovery and overall health and longevity. But also whether you're taking multivitamins or fish oils, fish oils, for example, help to replenish the lipids in your membranes, but those lipids can become oxidized, like we talked about. And so astaxanthin can help to mitigate that lipid peroxidation. And so it can go hand in hand with omega-3s, replenish the membrane with the omega-3s, and then prevent the oxidation, of the membrane with astaxanthin. And so it can be a great, complement to an omega-3 or a fish oil, krill oil product. There are other longevity supplements on the market that have some really interesting science as well. None of them have been proven to extend lifespan in ITP, so I think astaxanthin distinguishes itself there. But if someone wants to take other longevity agents that have good science behind them, I don't think it would be something to be done instead of those, but I think it can go alongside those. And so products that impact your NAD levels, for example, I think that is a complement to what astaxanthin does in terms of the effects on your mitochondrial energy production and other cellular functions.
Any contraindications, like any situations where you wouldn't want to take astaxanthin?
There's nothing clinically proven to be, an issue with like medications or other health issues, specifically. But there's always the caution, that should be taken if someone is on certain medications or, blood thinners, or if they have certain medical conditions, they should always, work closely with their doctor or healthcare professional to incorporate whether it's astaxanthin or any supplement or any medication into their routine. But there's nothing that has been proven, like, for example, to in humans to directly be contraindicated with a given medication, for example. Like in the cases of some anti-inflammatories, there will be warnings to, don't travel overseas because, won't be able to fight off an infection, if you're on this, really potent anti-inflammatory, because like I mentioned earlier, it's just chronically inhibiting aspects of your inflammatory response, which are needed to fight off infections. And so you're actually susceptible to, really grave illness or death if you become infected and can't fight it off. Whereas with astaxanthin, it's not impacting your natural response to fighting off an infection. So it's not contraindicated in that respect, like other anti-inflammatories may be. And in the case of other antioxidants or just other supplements, there's often issues where, okay, well, too much of a dose, there's going to be some issue. And for everything that the dose makes the poison is the saying. And so there is some level where probably nothing is safe at a given level. But with astaxanthin, all the studies that have been done with extremely high doses have not indicated any clinically relevant health issues for humans. And so that gives us a lot of confidence that within reason, you can find a dose that works for you, and you shouldn't have issues about wondering about taking too much. But again, always work with your doctor to, find the dose that works best for you.
Yeah, I mean, I so strongly believe in it. Like I get a lot of, first of all, in Genius Foods, my first book that came out in 2018, I think I was very ahead of the curve on carotenoids in general, but lutein and zeaxanthin in their application to brain health and the potential preventative role that they might play for conditions like Alzheimer's and dementia. Mm-hmm. But my diet, lutein and zeaxanthin are pretty easy, assuming you're eating a predominantly whole foods diet, to get on a regular basis. Like if you eat a salad a day, mm-hmm. you're getting an appreciable amount of lutein and zeaxanthin. And I think that's one of the mechanisms underlying the observation that people who eat dark leafy greens have brains that perform up, at almost a decade younger than their mm-hmm. biological age. But astaxanthin is not something, there's all this amazing research on it. It's not something that I would typically get in my diet. I mean, unless I'm eating wild salmon on a regular basis, which is not something that I routinely eat. I mean, I tend mm-hmm. to eat a lot of like grass-fed beef, poultry and stuff like that. But
and even if you are eating salmon, you're getting some, like 5 or 8 or 10 milligrams of astaxanthin, in a fillet, but you're not getting 24 milligrams or more, and you're not getting that every day necessarily. And so even if you were eating salmon a couple times a week, I mean, it's great. You'll be getting some astaxanthin, but you're not going to be getting the levels that are probably going to give you the most health and longevity benefits.
Well, and also levels in salmon range, right? Mm-hmm. There's the farmed Atlantic salmon, which is delicious, don't get me wrong, and still good for you, but like... Mm-hmm. Probably doesn't hold a candle in terms of its astaxanthin concentration to sockeye salmon.
Yeah, and you can notice just by the color, like the redder it is, the more astaxanthin it has. And but just to dispel one myth about the farm-raised salmon is they're not dyed pink or red. They are fed astaxanthin as part of their diet, and that's how they become red or pink. And also it helps them with their health and their development. So it is part of farm-raised salmon, but the farmers only include enough that they deem necessary to give the basic health benefits and the color that makes it commercially viable. Yeah. It's not going to be like overly red. So
right, consumers aren't into gray salmon.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but yeah, it's you get way more in sockeye, but sockeye is not as tasty and it's more expensive. I'm not saying it's not great. It is great, but it's not as tasty as Atlantic farmed, and it's more expensive. Mm-hmm. And with farmed salmon, you also run into problems like exposure to PCBs and stuff like that, depending on where it's how it's farmed. So to me, it just makes perfect sense that you'd be getting that supplementation is just a way to, it's like insurance. You know the dose that you're getting of this incredibly powerful compound. It's probably way more cost efficient to supplement with it as opposed to, regularly buying and eating sockeye salmon.
And I love salmon. I eat it a lot, but I also take astaxanthin, so I think it's a great addition. I think it makes sense for most people to consider. For the most part, I don't know people that are allergic to salmon or, therefore astaxanthin in any case. Some people ask about, well, can my children, take this? And it's like, well, can your child eat salmon? Probably, right? And so I think it's something that is beneficial to all ages. It's not just something for older people that want to kind of benefit, later life span and health span. It's something that can influence, your overall health throughout your life. And interestingly, there was a study published this year in school-aged children that were 10 to 14 years old. And with all the screen time that we have on phones and computers and tablets, they looked at children that suffered from computer vision, kind of like fatigue or, issues.
Eye strain.
Yeah, eye strain, digital eye strain. And so they dosed them. And actually, I had the study pulled up here that they took 64 kids, so a decent, group of them. Average age was 12, but ranging from 10 to 14. And they did a 12-week study with a pretty low dose, only 4 milligrams. But they did this computer vision syndrome questionnaire. And basically, they look at a bunch of visual aspects like, okay, do you have blurred vision, or do you have eye strain? Do you have double vision, difficulty focusing, and a bunch of related things. And they say, okay, how many of these do you experience? Like none of these, one of these, 2 or more of these. They also look at, like the actual the eye surface itself, like is it red, is it dry, is it irritated, and a bunch of things like that. They look at extraocular, like, neck strain or headaches or other things that may be related to that. They look at their frequency, and they ask, like, does this happen while you're actively looking at the screen, or is it something that happens later? And so they measured all of these things. They also looked at other measures of visual fatigue. And they also had, placebo controlled. So that, again, this was randomized, double blind. So that, the kids didn't know if they were getting actually astaxanthin or just the placebo. And what they demonstrated was that they had a 20% increase or benefit, in the computer vision syndrome questionnaire of result. So that was a 20% improvement there, and a 27% improvement in a related assessment of visual fatigue. And then they also looked at a couple other things like stereopsis, which is basically the ability for your 2 eyes to bring in, the different images and make a composite and give you that 3D vision, which you need for just everyday life. They looked at that. They saw a benefit there at both 28 days and 84 days, so 4 weeks and 12 weeks. And then also tear production, which is important for just normal eye function, was also improved. So here was a study that showed that it can actually have a real-world benefit. In this case for children, it supports the safety at a younger age as well. And it shows that, we're talking more about like your heart health or brain health, but even things like, daily digital eye strain, it's demonstrated benefit there, and in kids, for that matter as well. So that was, I think, some really interesting research that emerged this year. Just, it makes sense, but just we never would have thought about even, looking at that. And just say it wasn't our own study, it was conducted by another group, but it's just cool that all these different researchers throughout the world are advancing the science of astaxanthin.
So cool. Do you think that 4 milligrams per day is a reasonable dose for kids? Because I'm sure I've got a lot of parents that are listening.
I think that certainly, at least in this study, was shown to be effective. I don't know in terms of other aspects of health if that's optimal. 4 milligrams was kind of the traditional dose that when the first astaxanthin supplements came on the market, like back when we launched one of the first astaxanthin products in the year 2000, 4 milligrams was the standard, but it wasn't really based on the science, if you will. It was more just based on manufacturing, capacity and putting out a dose that seemed to make sense. And then over the years, it increased to 12 milligrams as more of a standard dose. And so I think the investigators, probably just to be safe, just say, okay, let's go with the low dose and see if that works. I would imagine that 12 would probably be fine or potentially better. And again, from a safety standpoint, some of those toxicity or safety studies have been done, for example, in they're called like development and reproductive studies, and they look at mothers that consume astaxanthin and then their offspring and the development of those, and astaxanthin was shown to be very safe in those cases. So I don't think there's any known safety concerns. And again, children could eat salmon, et cetera. So it seems like a lower dose like that would certainly be a great start. And then again, if your child is very active, does a lot of sports, there can be reasons there. And for example, here's another study this year that was really interesting. It was published also in July, and it looked at endurance in young cyclists. This wasn't children. It was they're about 22 years old, but still young adults. And this was 28 milligrams. So again, in the range of a typical dose. Smaller study, only 10 males, but it was placebo controlled as well. And they looked at a VO2 max related cycling challenge, where it's at 75% of your VO2 max, so a pretty strenuous activity. And they looked at the time to exhaustion, as well as some related biomarkers. And they found that they had a 13-minute longer time to exhaustion. And so that was it was 125 minutes versus 112 minutes of activity. So I mean, that's an extra 10% or more time to exhaustion, which if you're doing sports, imagine if you could run or cycle that much longer at a very high VO2 type of rate, 75% of your VO2 max. I mean, that is a meaningful difference. And so that's something that can benefit, again, people of all ages, which you want to maintain your VO2 max throughout life and have active, intense exercise throughout your life. And so this can be helpful in that respect. But they also measured things related to muscle damage. And so I talked about before, how when you exercise intensely, your muscle cells can be damaged and can leak out components of the cells like creatine kinase, which I talked about was what helped to add that phosphate group to the creatine, which can then help to convert ADP to ATP. The creatine kinase can leak out of the cells, and you can measure that as an indicator of muscle damage. That came down in these young cyclists. And lactate dehydrogenase was also released and showed the decrease in the young athletes here as well, which again is related to kind of energy production. And so that was something that was reduced as well as lipid peroxidation. So biomarkers plus real-world evidence of time to exhaustion all benefited in these young cyclists. So that kind of extends from the children to the young adults, and a totally different area from digital eye strain to endurance. And then jumping to older age, there was also another study. I mean, it's so interesting to find all these. I mean, there's 4,000 peer-reviewed papers, so I mean, you can always find a bunch of cool stuff.
It must make your day when a new study pops up.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's basically every day then, But so there was a study in community-acquired pneumonia. And so that's basically a pneumonia that is just acquired in everyday life, because there's also pneumonia that can occur in the hospital setting. And so they distinguish that. But this is just normal pneumonia that people may get out in the community. And it's a leading cause of, morbidity and mortality. Worldwide, it's a big issue. In the U.S., I think there's 1.5 million hospitalizations every year as a result of pneumonia. So obviously, everyone knows that's not a good thing. And so say you get pneumonia, you have a prescription for an antibiotic that may address, the infection that's, contributing to the pneumonia, for example. But your body also responds with its inflammatory, immune response. And just like in the case of COVID, you can have a cytokine storm where you just have this amplification of your inflammatory response that doesn't just, last for the duration of the illness, but then it just stays going and kind of cooking beyond that, and leads to longer term issues because your body has just, been chronically producing more inflammatory, actors. And so this was a study in adults with 80 people, 40 per group, placebo-controlled, randomized, double blind, all of that. This was only 12 milligrams a day, so a lower type of dose, but still very reasonable. And it was given as an additional agent on top of the normal antibiotic therapy. And so they looked at a bunch of things. They looked at the hospital stay. They looked at it's called a sequential organ failure assessment, where they look at all the key aspects of your organs, how your heart is functioning, your lungs, your liver, your kidneys, and they score how all of your organs are functioning. Because if you're hospitalized, they want to get a sense of, okay, is this person doing okay? Do we need to go to the ICU? What's going on? They also have a related chronic health evaluation score, which again looks at a lot of those aspects of your organs and critical biomarkers. And in this group, they found that they reduced IL-6 and TNF-alpha, which are inflammatory biomarkers. They also improved those scores of the sequential organ failure assessment and the related questionnaire. But they also reduced the hospital stay. It only reduced by like a day, from 8 days to 7 days, but and that portion was not statistically significant. It was numerically one less day, but the sample size probably wasn't big enough to statistically prove that. But the other results were statistically significant. And so
lower inflammatory
markers, impacts on the organ, health assessments and things. And so what it shows that it probably helped to support the body in recovering, and the quality of the experience to getting back on your feet, basically. And so again, it's not a drug, but it's something that could support a setting like this where you're trying to do everything you can to recover.
Remarkable. It was definitely part of my post back surgery stack. I had a lot of things in that stack. I was taking like various peptides, and I was collagen maxing and bone broth and lots of stuff, but astaxanthin was definitely in there as well. So it's just been really interesting to see all these different things, and there's other studies that were published this year that look at muscle health and athletic health and and other animal models and things, but it's just like you can go on PubMed and find all types of really cool research. Oh, it's amazing. In a sea of snake oil and wild and crazy claims, social media can be the wild, wild west for supplements being hawked. Astaxanthin's the real deal. Like it's amazing. It's like that's why it's been one of these compounds that I routinely, take, and I've taken for such a long time. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great model for everyone, to look into the science and to really take the things that you believe have merit and are not just a popular fad type of an item. Because some agents, get a lot of buzz, and then all of a sudden you don't hear about them anymore.
Exactly.
But astaxanthin, it doesn't have a whole lot of hype necessarily, but I think it holds up with all the science that is there. And I think the science as it emerges really helps to create more exposure for it, because I think more people need to know about it and to try it and hopefully incorporate it into their lifestyle.
For sure. Well, my listeners know that I'm a huge fan. So I just want to say thank you for coming out and for delivering this masterclass. So fun. I know if you guys want to do an even deeper dive, your first appearance on the show was super thorough, so people can go and listen to that as well. But thank you for bringing in all the latest data. I know that you have an incredible offer for the Genius Life listeners. People can go to ax3.life, and use code MAX for 20% off.
That's right.
Which is super generous, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
And where can people... I guess they can go to the website. Are you on social media?
Yeah, Instagram, ax3.life as well.
Cool.
But I think the best way is to listen to some of the podcasts. So just like this one, our podcast last year, I've done a bunch of others as well. And I think those are all good conversations that allow people to learn about astaxanthin in a way that can be potentially more interesting than just reading a paper, reading a website. Because it is complicated and is nuanced, to understand why astaxanthin is special and why it's different than other antioxidants or other anti-inflammatories or other longevity agents or just other supplements in general. And so it takes a little bit of time to go through the details, but I think if people take the time, they'll find that it really is something that's really special and unique, and it's been proven its role in nature, its role in human health and longevity and other species as well.
Yeah, and just to speak to your advocacy, like you don't often encounter founders of supplement companies who are as fluent in the scientific literature as you are, and as dedicated to communicating the science in a way that's nuanced and responsible. as you are. So I just want to, applaud you for
thank you.
doing what you do. Yeah, you do a great job.
I mean, it's fun. I'm naturally excited about it. It's something that it's rewarding to see the benefit that people experience from it. And then the science that backs it up is just really intriguing and interesting. And I think it's a lot of fun to just talk about it and to share that knowledge.
Amen. Well, thanks again for coming out.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you guys for listening. Again, check out ax3.life and use promo code MAX for 20% off. I take 24 milligrams a day in case anybody's curious, wants to match me. But, you can take 12. But in general, it's a great product, and I'm super proud to support. So thank you again, Dave. Thank you guys for listening, and I will catch you on the next episode. Peace, everybody. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.